Agatha Christie wrote 66 detective novels, 49 short stories, 14 plays. Her words changed mystery fiction forever. But among her archives, there's mention of a story she began in secret. A case so disturbing, her publisher never saw it, her family never discussed it, and the manuscript. It was never officially catalogued. For decades, this file remained buried in the Christie estate, until a curious archivist in Devon uncovered it, a manuscript missing its ending. It was a Miss Marple case. But it wasn't like the others. There was no garden party, no vicar, no gentle deduction. There were whispers of hallucinations, vanishings, a village that didn't appear on any map, and a line repeated in the margins of every page. This is the story Agatha never finished. This is the mystery no one wanted solved, until now. We've reconstructed the final known moments of Miss Marple's last case, using notes from Christie's lost journals, letters never mailed, and one page typed in a style Agatha never used. You may think you know Miss Marple, but this is not her story. This is the mystery Agatha never finished, Miss Marple's vanished case. And if you stay, you'll hear every piece of the puzzle we were never meant to find. Oh, did you see the figure behind Agatha? Oh, why was the map of Black Hollow blank? Oh, do you believe the manuscript was cursed? Did you catch the hidden message in the intro? Drop your theories. What do you think Miss Marple saw in Black Hollow? Chapter 1. A manuscript without an ending. It began with a village no one could quite remember, a place that never appeared on maps, that drew no mention in public records, and yet, when spoken aloud, seemed oddly familiar, as though it lived not in geography, but in memory. The kind of memory passed down in whispers, half-formed recollections and things left unsaid. A place heard about in passing, in the margins of conversation, only to vanish from thought moments later. The year was 1956. Post-war England had settled into a kind of breathless quiet. Reconstruction was in motion, ration books were being phased out, and the countryside, long scarred by the tremors of war, was finding its rhythm again. But not everywhere. There were places time hadn't touched in the same way, where silence clung like ivy, where people moved carefully, and where modernity never quite took root. Nestled somewhere between the counties of Devon and Somerset was a narrow path shrouded in mist. No road signs marked its entrance, no traveller found it twice. The trees along it bent unnaturally inward, as if listening. And at the end of it, past a crumbling stone bridge and a crooked fence, sat the village of Black Hollow. It was in this setting that Jane Marple arrived. She had not come by train nor coach. She had accepted the invitation of a friend, someone she could not quite recall, whose letter bore no return address. The handwriting was neat but unfamiliar, the message brief. You may find Black Hollow of interest. There is a pattern here you will recognise. Signed simply, E.V. Miss Marple, ever curious, ever meticulous, had packed a single valise and departed the next morning. Her housekeeper had asked no questions. Her neighbours saw her off with the usual half-curious glances. It was, to them, just another of her excursions. They never asked where she was going. They never did. Somehow it always felt best not to know. The weather on the day of her arrival was uneven. The sky moved strangely. Clouds shifted in opposing directions, and the birds, though visible, made no sound. The driver who brought her most of the way did so under odd protest. He was a man of few words, his eyes frequently darting toward the rearview mirror, as if something followed behind them. When the carriage dropped her off, the driver looked straight ahead and spoke only once. "I won't be coming back this way." He left her at a fork in the road where a rusted signpost bore no name. Beyond it, Black Hollow waited. The village itself was small. No more than a dozen stone cottages, each pressed close to the next like secrets unwilling to be shared. Windows stared blankly onto a narrow lane where no carts passed. There was a church with no steeple, a bakery with no scent, and a general store whose door was never open but always unlocked. The people were polite. Too polite. Their faces wore the kind of expressions one finds in old photographs, fixed, careful, just shy of warm. And all of them, without exception, referred to Miss Marple by name. Though she had never met any of them before. She was given a room at the Hollow Hearth, a modest inn that had once been a schoolhouse. Her key was already waiting, and her name had been etched into the ledger in looping cursive. She asked the innkeeper, a pale woman named Merrill, how she had known she was coming. Merrill only smiled. "People like you always find their way here." That night, the air grew heavy with the promise of rain. Miss Marple took out the letter again, reading and rereading the brief message. She tried to place the initials, E.V., but none of her acquaintances matched. She checked her diary. No previous mention, nothing in her meticulous records pointed toward an Eleanor Vale, Eliza Vaughan, or anyone that might fit. Then, as she turned out the light, she heard it. A scratching sound, not loud, not frantic, just slow, measured, coming from the wall beside her bed. She rose, lit a candle, and pressed her ear against the plaster. Nothing. She tapped the wall, listened, scratched back, lightly, and then the sound stopped. In the morning she would say nothing of it, but she would not sleep in that bed again. She slept in the chair by the window instead, facing the road. Her exploration of the village began the following day. She took notes, observed routines, spoke with villagers who always seemed to be waiting for her, as if standing where she would pass before she decided to walk there. They smiled just a moment too long. They blinked less often than most. No one mentioned the name Eleanor Vale, though the initials matched. And yet, that name began to surface, on a church donation plaque, in the library's borrowing register, and carved faintly into the windowsill of her room. Eleanor was here. She saw it. The most curious structure in Black Hollow was the library. A single-room building with dust-covered shelves and a librarian who never blinked. Miss Marple found a corner there, filled with local legends, all typed on onion skin paper, unsigned, unverified. Stories of people waking in fields they had never seen, of clocks that reversed time, and a girl who once vanished into a mirror. Among these was a slim file labelled "For Outsiders." Inside, a single page. Some things are better left unwritten. It was on her third evening that Miss Marple encountered the old woman, sitting at the edge of the village well, stirring something into a chipped porcelain teacup. She wore a blue shawl and a blank stare. But when she saw Miss Marple, she smiled. "You're the one who reads between the lines, the one who sees what the author did not intend." Miss Marple sat beside her, folding her hands neatly in her lap. "Did you know Eleanor Vale?" she asked. The woman sipped from the cup. Knew her. "My dear, she never left. Not really. She wrote herself in too deep." Miss Marple opened her mouth to ask more, but the woman stood suddenly, eyes wide. "Careful where you look. The pages here turn themselves." And then she was gone. The air where she'd been smelled faintly of ink and old flowers. That night, Miss Marple searched her room. There had to be something, and behind the wardrobe she found it. A sliver of parchment, yellowed and torn. On it, written in the same looping cursive from the ledger, "She saw me, and now she can't unsee me." The candle beside her flickered. In the mirror across the room, her reflection stood very still. Too still. She stared for a full minute, unblinking. The reflection did not move. Then, just for a moment, the reflected candle bent, as if caught in a wind that wasn't in the room. Miss Marple stepped back. Quietly, deliberately, she covered the mirror with a cloth and turned the candle out. She did not sleep. Chapter 2. The Incident, the Disappearing Widow. When a disappearance takes place in a town already forgotten by time, questions have a way of drifting rather than being asked. In Black Hollow, where the silence outlasts conversation and days arrive with identical grey skies, a person could vanish quietly, and the air would barely change. But on one particular morning in late October, something did change. The first sign was not a sound. It was a stillness. The kind that replaces a presence you didn't realise you were relying on. The kind that causes you to notice a chair that's no longer occupied, a kettle that didn't boil, or a voice that hasn't been heard since yesterday. Her name was Eleanor Vale. She had lived in Black Hollow longer than any of the others. Some say she arrived after the war. Others believe she was already there before it began. No one remembers her being born. No one recalls a maiden name. And yet, her presence in the village had always been regarded as certain. She lived alone in a cottage at the far edge of the lane, beside the moss-covered path that led nowhere. Her house was known for its climbing vines and the window with lace curtains that never moved. She was seen often, but spoken to rarely. When she did speak, her words were deliberate, as if reciting from a script she had written long ago. And then, she was no longer there. Miss Marple had been in Black Hollow for 3 days, long enough to begin sensing the absences, long enough to understand that certain things were not said aloud, even in casual conversation. She noticed the change when she passed Eleanor's cottage on her morning walk. The front door was closed as usual. The curtains were drawn, as they always were. But something was different. The scent. The air had taken on the faint trace of lilies. Not fresh ones, but lilies past bloom. Faintly sweet, tinged with age. She paused, then continued walking. But the scent followed. At the hollow hearth, she asked Merrill if Eleanor had been seen that morning. Merrill stared at her for a moment too long. No one lives in that house. Miss Marple said nothing. She returned to her room, where she found an envelope tucked beneath her teacup. It was not there when she left. The paper was thin, nearly translucent. The handwriting was familiar now, looping, slanted, the same as the note behind the wardrobe. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a letter. Dear Agatha, if this reaches you, I will have already crossed the page. He comes when the air smells of lilies. You mustn't write the ending. He will know. He always knows. Eleanor. Miss Marple held the letter in her lap for a long time. The handwriting. It matched one of the annotations she'd found in the library. The signature had been there all along, faded, light against light. She left the inn that afternoon and returned to the cottage. The door was unlocked. Inside, nothing had been disturbed. The fireplace was cold. A teacup sat beside the armchair, the kettle full, the rugs flattened by years of habit. A shawl hung on the back of a chair, its threads worn but clean. Eleanor's slippers were by the bed. Everything was as it should be, except Eleanor was gone. Miss Marple checked every room, every window. She noted the lack of dust, the way the mirrors had been covered, the way the air clung to fabric. The scent of lilies was stronger inside. She opened the wardrobe, half expecting to find another letter. Instead, she found a book. A diary, no dates, no headings, just lines of reflection. He watches through the glass. He waits for you to speak his name. Do not speak it. Do not describe him. He does not like to be seen. On the last page, a smear of ink. The sentence incomplete. If I go now, perhaps he won't follow. The rest of the page is blank, and then, the page beneath it, glued to the backing, hidden at first glance, was different. It was not handwritten. It was typed. Miss Marple entered the room at 3:46 p.m. She turned the last page. The door behind her closed. Miss Marple turned, quickly. The door was indeed closed. She had not touched it. Outside the window, the wind resumed. The trees leaned slightly toward the house. The vines along the brick trembled without movement. Back in the village square, the bells rang again, 13 times. She took the diary to the inn. But by morning, it was gone. No one remembered her taking it. No one recalled her visit to Eleanor's home. The villagers, when asked about Eleanor, gave answers that grew less consistent with each telling. One said she'd moved away in the spring. Another insisted she passed long ago. Another smiled blankly and said, "You must mean Ethel." Miss Marple returned to the cottage. It was empty. The scent of lilies had vanished. But the teacup was warm. Later that evening, back at her room, Miss Marple stood by the window for some time, staring into the courtyard where no one had walked all day. She scribbled down notes in her small black notebook. Halfway through a line, she paused. The air shifted. Her reflection in the glass seemed slightly delayed, a bit behind, barely noticeable. But there. She closed the curtain. When she opened her notebook the next morning, the final line from her notes had been changed. Her handwriting, her pen, but not her words. She is still here, but not where you're looking. Chapter 3. The descent begins. It begins with reflection. Not metaphorically, literally. A reflection that no longer lines up with the person it belongs to. A reflection that blinks when you don't, that moves before you do, that looks just a little too long after you've turned away. Miss Marple first noticed the change the morning after the diary vanished. Miss Marple first noticed the change the morning after the diary vanished. She had risen early, her rest fractured by uneasy dreams, ones she couldn't recall fully, only the impressions they left behind. A child's voice, whispering backwards. Her own hands trying to write something she didn't recognize. A door slowly opening, but only on the wrong side. She dressed as always, methodically, practically. A navy cardigan over a pale blouse, hair pinned, sensible shoes. She looked into the mirror to check the lay of her collar, and paused. Her image was already looking at her. There was no delay, no hesitation. And yet, something was wrong. The light. It was as if the sun outside her window had failed to reach the reflection. Her side of the room was bathed in grey morning haze. The mirror's side remained in dusk. She moved her hand. Slowly. The reflection moved too. Perfectly. But the timing was wrong. A fraction of a second ahead, not after. Miss Marple stood motionless for nearly a full minute. Then she reached behind the mirror. The wall was cool. Still. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, she told herself, but from the cold. She covered the glass with a cloth and went downstairs. Breakfast at the hollow hearth was unusually quiet. The other guests, if they were guests, were already seated. No one spoke. They lifted forks, spread jam, sipped tea, but no sound accompanied their movements. The room should have been filled with the scrape of chairs, the murmur of voices. Nothing. Merrill stood behind the counter, polishing a spoon that did not need polishing. She met Miss Marple's eyes only once, briefly. There was something different in her gaze. Recognition, yes, but something else. Apprehension. Miss Marple sat. No one looked at her, not directly. A young girl, no older than 10, sat at the far end of the table, drawing intently on a piece of scrap paper. Her tongue poked from the side of her mouth in concentration. Her pencil moved with certainty. Miss Marple sipped her tea, lukewarm. The girl looked up once, made eye contact, then smiled. It was a wide, quiet smile, familiar. When she returned to her drawing, Miss Marple leaned slightly to see. The image was crude, childlike, but unmistakable. A woman hanging by a rope from the branch of a crooked tree. Miss Marple's name was written in careful block letters underneath. She stood, slowly. Her chair did not creak. Her footsteps made no sound on the floor. Outside, the village moved differently. People walked, but not toward destinations. They circled, strolled, paused beside hedges and fences as if waiting for something to arrive that hadn't yet been named. She passed 3 villagers she had spoken to the day before. None acknowledged her. She stopped at the church. The door stood ajar. Inside, pews sat crooked. Hymnals were missing pages. The pulpit was empty. A large mirror had been placed where the altar once stood. She approached it slowly. This time, she didn't look directly. She let her eyes drift toward the edges first, watching for movement, expecting delay. The reflection held steady, but in the pews behind her, visible only in the mirror, sat every villager she had passed that morning. Unmoving, silent, their faces blank. Miss Marple turned quickly. The church was empty. She faced the mirror again. The pews behind her in the glass were still full. She stepped away, walking backwards until the frame left her view. At the general store, she found no clerk. Only shelves stocked with items she couldn't name. Cans with labels peeled away, boxes with blank sides, a register with no keys. On the counter, another drawing. The same child's handwriting, the same thick strokes, a window. And in it, 2 Miss Marples, one standing behind the other. Back at the inn, she opened the curtain from the morning. The reflection now seemed normal enough. She leaned in. Her reflection blinked with her. She stepped back, left the room. In the hallway, she passed the same girl from breakfast. The girl looked up. "Did you like your portrait?" she asked. Miss Marple nodded slowly. "Why did you draw that?" The girl tilted her head. "I didn't." She skipped down the hall. At the end, she turned. She's standing closer now. Miss Marple did not eat dinner that night. She sat in her room, watching the mirror through the cloth. Just before midnight, the cloth shifted. Not by touch, not by breeze, by suggestion. It slipped slightly, enough for her to see the outline of her face. Her reflection was already awake. Chapter 4. The Unfinished Diary. Pages that bleed. There is something about ink that carries more than words. It stains, it seeps, it remembers. Long after a sentence ends, ink lingers, settling deep into the fibres of paper, becoming part of it. But in Black Hollow, ink does not settle. Not always. Sometimes it remains fluid, as if the thoughts behind it are not yet done speaking. It was the 4th day of Miss Marple's stay when she returned to Eleanor Vale's cottage. The reflection in her room had remained still since the night before. Too still. So she left without saying a word. The cottage looked unchanged. The same overgrown vines, the same curtain that had never once moved. But this time she did not enter through the front door. She circled the back. There, beneath the kitchen window, lay a patch of disturbed soil, faint, almost unnoticeable. The grass there was slightly flatter, the earth a shade darker, as if it had been lifted, then pressed back again. Miss Marple knelt. Her hands moved with care. A loose stone, then another, and beneath them, wood, warped, splintering, a floorboard. She lifted it. Inside, wrapped in cloth stiff with age, was a book, slim, bound in weathered leather, the cover unmarked. She opened it. The pages were handwritten, a style she recognized now, Eleanor's. But something was wrong, the ink. Where most entries had faded with time, these lines shimmered slightly under the light, wet to the touch, as if they had just been written. And when she turned the pages, the ink transferred, smudging faintly onto her fingertips. She flipped back to the first entry. The first time I saw him, he was standing where the mirror should have been. I blinked, and he was gone, but the reflection stayed. The entry had no date, no title, just the quiet terror of a woman documenting something she didn't dare speak aloud. Miss Marple read on. He doesn't make sound. He doesn't need to. You know he's there because things stop working around him. Clocks pause, birds leave, words won't come. I tried to leave, walked the path past the stone fence. It led back to the house, every time. Sometimes it takes longer. Sometimes the trees move. She turned the page. The ink bled across the lines, as if the pen had pressed too hard or the words had resisted being contained. He watches through glass, sometimes windows, sometimes spoons, always from somewhere just behind me. If I look too long, he smiles. I think that's what it is. Miss Marple paused. The room around her was still. But in the hallway mirror, she saw a shadow pass, not across the floor, across the wall. She stood slowly. No one was there. The next entry was short. I thought it was a dream, until I found the drawings. I don't remember making them, but they're all of him. Blank face, no eyes, just suggestion. Tucked between the pages was a small piece of paper, torn from the diary. On it, a sketch. A figure standing beside a window. No features, but the outline was unmistakable. A tall man, thin, tilted slightly. Behind him a second window, and inside it, Eleanor's face. She turned the page again. I can't leave, not even through words. I think he reads over my shoulder. Ink smeared. The sentence below it had been written twice. If you see him, don't blink. If you see him, don't blink. Then the final entry. I tried to burn the diary. The fire went out. I tried to drown it. The water boiled. I left it under the floor. If it finds you, it's because he wants you to know. The last line was in red. He has no face because he wears yours. Miss Marple closed the book. The ink on her fingers was still wet. She returned to the inn without speaking. But that night the diary was nowhere to be found. Her bag remained untouched. The spot beside her chair was empty. When she questioned Merrill about the lost item, the innkeeper only said, "Books don't disappear here. They return, eventually, just not always where you left them." Later that evening, she found a single page lying on her pillow. Folded, yellowed, bearing a fresh smear of ink. There was no message, just an outline. Her silhouette, drawn in red. Behind it, another shape, featureless, waiting. Chapter 5. Strange Clocks. Time stopped at 3:33. Time, in most places, is a steady current, unnoticed until disturbed, measured in seconds, ticks and rituals, the rise of the sun, the ring of a bell, the scrape of a chair at breakfast. But in Black Hollow, time moved differently. Not faster, not slower, but inconsistently. And on the 5th night of Miss Marple's stay, time stopped altogether. The hour was 3:33 a.m. The clocks all agreed. She awoke to the sound of silence. Not the kind born from peace, but from the absence of movement, a kind that grips the walls of a room and holds them still. Her watch had stopped. The mantel clock in the hallway had frozen. The inn's grandfather clock, which usually groaned just before each chime, stood mute. She sat up in bed, her ears strained. Then, 3 knocks. Deliberate. Not hurried. Not loud. But they came from the inside. The door to her room was closed. The knocks repeated. Not from outside her room, but from the wardrobe. She stepped carefully onto the floor, cold beneath her feet. Her fingers reached for the candle. She did not light it. She moved to the wardrobe. Her hand rested on the handle. She did not open it. The knocks stopped. Instead, she turned to her slippers. And there, tucked neatly inside the left one, was a folded note. The paper was the same kind used in the diary. The ink had not dried. The message read, You wrote me into being. That morning, she went from house to house, every clock, every watch, 3:33. Even the sundial behind the church cast no shadow. She asked the baker what time it was. He smiled politely. Time enough for bread, she asked the grocer. He looked up, blinked once, then said, It's always morning somewhere. Miss Marple returned to her room and opened the wardrobe. Nothing inside had moved, but there was something new. A small square mirror she did not own, and on its surface, fogged from within, she wiped it gently. For a moment, no reflection. Just the wallpaper behind her, then her face. Alone, but behind it, on the wall, was a painting that did not exist in her room. A portrait of her, but not quite. The colours were muted, her expression unfamiliar, as if she'd been captured mid-thought. She turned around, nothing on the wall. She looked back into the mirror. The portrait remained. That night, she found herself awake again at the same time, 3:33. No sound, no knocks, but on her bedside table, another note. Stop writing me. I am finished. The next day, she visited the church again. The mirror behind the pulpit had changed. Its surface was now dull, like old silver, and in it the pews were once again full. This time the congregation stood. Facing her, she turned. The church was empty. She turned back. One figure was missing. Her own. Chapter 6. The Locked Door. The room that wasn't there before. There are certain things in a room one learns to overlook. The hairline crack in the baseboard, a faint shadow behind the wardrobe, a door that has always been closed. Miss Marple had spent enough years in observation to know the difference between familiarity and assumption. What she saw that morning was neither. It was unfamiliar and undeniable. A door that had not existed the day before. Her cottage, modest and unchanging, had 3 doors. The main entrance, the lavatory, and the hallway closet. But now, as she stood brushing her hair at the window, she noticed the corner beside the bookcase looked wrong. Not just changed, repositioned. A shift of architecture. She turned. The bookcase had moved, slightly, and behind it, a door. Its frame was old, its handle brass, ornate, a keyhole that suggested it had once belonged to a much older house. She approached it slowly. The wood was cold to the touch. There was no key. She pressed her hand against the grain and pushed. It opened inward. Inside was a room, small, windowless, dustless. The walls were lined with photographs. And in every photograph, Miss Marple. Not as she knew herself, but as she had been. Childhood, school, her first teaching position, a birthday she never celebrated, events she remembered, but never captured on camera. In some, she smiled. In others, she stared directly into the lens, unaware of being watched. But it was the photograph above the writing desk that held her still. Eleanor Vale, standing at the foot of Miss Marple's bed, watching her sleep. The timestamp, 2 nights prior. Miss Marple stepped closer. The photo changed. Eleanor was no longer alone. Behind her, barely in focus, a figure, featureless, still. Her gaze drifted along the rest of the room, a chair that didn't match the others, a mirror that had no reflection, a drawer with no handle, slightly ajar. Inside the drawer, a stack of papers, typed. The font old, almost mechanical. She lifted the first page. Entry 1. She has entered the house. She has not yet seen the door. The door sees her. Miss Marple scanned the following pages. Each one documented something she had done. Moments she hadn't spoken aloud. Thoughts she hadn't written down. Entry 9. She suspects the clocks. She is correct, but for the wrong reason. Entry 14. She has noticed the child. The child is not a child. She stops reading. a sound. Not loud, barely audible, a breath. Not hers. She turned quickly, no one there. She turned back to the desk. The photograph had changed again. She was now sitting in the bed, eyes open, looking directly at Eleanor. The timestamp had shifted. Tonight's date, 3:33 a.m. Miss Marple backed away slowly. The door was closed. She reached for the handle. It turned. The hallway beyond was darker than it should have been, the walls slightly closer. The light bulb overhead flickered, not because it was loose, but because it was listening. She stepped out, closed the door behind her. When she turned to look again, there was no door, just the bookshelf, back in place, but the book at the top, the one with the blue spine, was turned backwards. She had never touched it. She reached for it slowly. Inside, a single page, blank. She held it up to the light. A message appeared. "You are writing me again." Chapter 7. The Fog Walking into Nonair. Fog has a way of rewriting the edges of reality. It does not fall, it gathers. Not from above, but from within. In Black Hollow, fog does not signal change in weather, it signals change in memory. It began just before dawn. Miss Marple had not slept. The room with the photographs had not reappeared. But the note inside the blue book remained, and its message had changed. Walk before it wakes. She didn't ask what it meant. She put on her shoes, took her notebook, and left the cottage. The street was still, unmoved, unmoving. And ahead, fog, thick, dense, pressed tight against the houses like gauze soaked in time. It wasn't drifting in from the hills, it was rising, from the ground. Miss Marple followed the sound, not of footsteps, not of voices, but of crying, a child's, faint, distant, familiar. She turned the corner by the bakery. The building was intact, the door still slightly ajar, but inside, shelves were empty. The child's voice drifted again. From the woods, beyond the village's border. She passed Merrill in the street. The innkeeper did not turn to greet her. Instead, Merrill stood still, eyes forward, hands clasped. And when Miss Marple looked directly at her, Merrill blinked. Once, then looked away. Miss Marple spoke. "Have you seen a child?" Merrill responded without expression. Black Hollow has no children. The voice came again, from the fog. Miss Marple walked forward. The air grew colder, not with temperature, but with something unmeasured. An absence. The trees thinned. She reached the clearing. And then she stepped out. But where she arrived was Black Hollow, again, unchanged. She looked back. The path she had taken was gone. The trees had closed. The fog thickened behind her like a door slowly shutting. She approached a woman outside the chapel. "Do you know Eleanor Vale?" The woman tilted her head. "No one by that name lives here." Miss Marple asked another. "I've lived here all my life," the man said. "Never heard of her." At the inn, the ledger was empty. No name, no record, not even her own. She stood in the common room. Same clock, same teacup on the mantel, but the painting on the wall, different. Now, a scene of fog, trees, and in the corner, a small, distant figure, watching. Back on the street, she walked past the schoolhouse. Children played outside, but none of them had faces. They moved, laughed, but their heads were blank, like mannequins in motion. She blinked, they were gone. One woman swept the front step of her home. Miss Marple approached. "Pardon me," she said. "I'm looking for someone." The woman turned. Her face was familiar, but her eyes were not. She looked directly into the lens of the documentary crew's perspective. The viewer. She stared. and did not blink. Then she spoke. "You shouldn't have come back." Miss Marple took a step back. The woman resumed sweeping, as though nothing had happened. Back at the inn, she found her room identical. But something had shifted. Her suitcase was missing. The mirror above the dresser had a fine crack. A child's drawing lay on the bed, crumpled slightly. Unfolded, it revealed her. Miss Marple, standing under a tree. But above her, written in unfamiliar handwriting, "What you forget will remember you." She turned to the mirror, and for just a moment, the reflection wasn't hers. Chapter 8. The radio message. Dead air. There are frequencies we do not choose to hear. Waves that pass through us. Silent, invisible, persistent, not lost, just waiting to be caught. The radio in Miss Marple's room had not worked since the day she arrived. It was an old set, heavy with dust, dials stiff with disuse. She had turned it once. Static, then silence. She never tried again. But on the 8th night, it came on by itself. No warning, no power surge, just a low crackle. As though something had shifted slightly, enough to let something else in. She sat up in bed. The radio's dial glowed faintly, though the room was otherwise dark. The light pulsed, not evenly. Like breathing. The static rose and fell. Then a voice. Female. Measured. British. Familiar. "You're the author now. Finish it, or stay here forever." The sound was clear. No distortion. Miss Marple rose, approached the radio. The voice came again. "Jane. He waits on the other side of the period. Mind the punctuation. He's very particular." She reached out, touched the dial. The voice paused, then spoke once more. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to start it. I only wanted to observe. But it writes back, Jane. It writes back." The voice was unmistakable. Agatha Christie. Dead for over a year. The dial light faded. Miss Marple sat in silence. Then the voice returned. But this time, from the mirror. She turned sharply, but the glass showed only her reflection. And yet, her reflection had not moved. It stared back, expressionless, waiting. Then the radio crackled again. This time slower, more distorted. "Do you know what you've done?" The voice had changed. No longer Agatha. Deeper, colder, masculine, deliberate. You turned the page, and with it, you turned the key. Miss Marple stepped away. The air in the room had shifted. Her breath became visible for the first time. The mirror's surface began to ripple. Not like water, but like paper catching wind that wasn't there. On the surface, writing began to form. Write it. Or remain part of it. The message vanished just as suddenly. She turned to her notebook. Pages had filled themselves in her handwriting. None of it she remembered writing. Each paragraph began with, "Chapter 9. The manuscript, the words write themselves. Thought is meant to be private, silent, untouched. Yet, when thought becomes visible, captured, before it is even formed, something sacred is crossed. A line blurs, between the mind and the page, between authorship and being authored." Miss Marple had not written anything in days. Her notebook remained closed, though she now found pages filled in her handwriting. Ideas she didn't remember conceiving, observations she had not made. The handwriting was hers, the phrasing too, but the thoughts were not. She woke on the 9th day to the sound of keys. Not musical, mechanical, a typewriter. She followed the sound. It wasn't in her room. It wasn't in the hallway. It came from the attic, a place she had never been. At the top of the narrow staircase, behind a door with a latch that should not have moved on its own, she found the source. An old Remington sat beneath a slanted window. The keys moved on their own, slowly, rhythmically, typing a sentence, then pausing, as if waiting for something. She stepped closer. The keys clacked again. She is reading this now. Then another line. She is wondering when it started. Then it started when she said yes to the letter. Miss Marple did not move. The typewriter continued. She opened the wardrobe. She found the note. She followed the fog. Each moment she thought about resisting, the next line appeared. She is considering leaving. She won't. The carriage shifted. The page ejected. Another fed in automatically. It was blank. Until, she thought, what happens if I destroy it? The keys tapped. Then you will have to rewrite it, from memory. And memory is not your own anymore. The room grew colder, her breath visible again. The paper turned yellow at the edges. On the table next to the typewriter was a stack of previous pages. Typed, dated, catalogued. Each one detailed things no one could have recorded. Moments inside her thoughts, dreams she hadn't remembered until now. She flipped through them. One page described her finding the diary under the floor. Another described her reading the message in the mirror. A third predicted this moment exactly. She paused. The typewriter clicked once more. She will look behind her now. She didn't want to. She did. No one was there. She turned back. The machine had stopped. But the page now contained a new sentence. He writes with your hands when you sleep. She slowly reached toward the stack of typed pages and flipped through them again, faster now, more urgently. The farther she went, the less they seemed like records and more like predictions. Entry 73. She will sit again tonight. The radio will speak, but not in words. Entry 74. Her hands will ache in the morning, from writing things she will not remember. Entry 75. She will begin to forget the sound of her own voice. The paper under her fingers felt thinner now, almost brittle. Some pages were stained with watermarks, but she knew it had not rained. The next page in the stack bore no number, no heading, only one phrase. The attic window will show her a version of herself that never left. She turned toward the window. Outside, the village looked unchanged, but standing in the road below was her. Same coat, same shoes, but unmoving, head tilted upward. Watching her, she stepped back from the glass. The figure remained. She closed the attic door behind her and descended the stairs. Each step made no sound. As if the wood itself had ceased remembering. Everything was still. Then, passing panic, the sight only became disturbed as she accidentally descended the stairs. She closed the attic door behind her and descended the stairs. When she returned to her room, her notebook was open. The last line was still forming on the page. Not typed, written, in her handwriting. But she had not touched the pen. She has almost remembered how this ends. Chapter 10. The Revelation. Miss Marple never left. There is a moment in every mystery where the facts begin to curve, where the familiar refuses to settle into the shapes we expect, where what we remember is outpaced by what we are shown. Black Hollow had always been a place that resisted conclusion, but now it resisted time itself. Miss Marple had begun to understand something she could not yet name. It started with the newspaper. She found it on the front step of the hollow hearth, dated 2 days ahead. The headline read, "No trace of guest after apparent check-in." The article was brief, a single paragraph. The name was hers. She entered the inn. Merrill was not behind the desk. The lobby was quiet, colder than usual. The clock ticked in the wrong direction. On the wall, a framed photograph had changed. Where there had once been an image of the village square, There was now a blurred figure, caught mid-step, as though the shutter had hesitated. The figure wore her scarf. She moved up the stairs, back to her room. Each door she passed bore no number. When she opened her own door, the bed was unmade, the mirror was missing. But on the desk, a letter. The envelope was sealed, the handwriting hers. Inside, "You never checked in." She sat slowly, looked around the room. The shadows had moved slightly off their objects. They stretched a little longer than the walls allowed. She reached for her notebook. It was gone. In its place, another typed page. "This is where you started. This is where you stayed." She stood, her knees trembled. She opened the wardrobe. Inside, her clothes were gone. In their place, a dress she hadn't worn in decades, folded neatly. In the pocket of the dress, another note. She thought she came here to solve something, but the village had already solved her. She stepped into the hallway. The door behind her closed. Softly, without touch. The hallway no longer led to the staircase, only to another hallway, and then another. Identical, endless. Every window looked out on the same corner of the village, the same passerby walking by again and again. Every time the same pause, the same glance over the shoulder. She pressed her hand to the glass. The figure outside stopped walking, and slowly Ahmed turned to face her. But the face was not one she recognized. Not fully. It was almost hers, but younger, sharper, more exact, as if copied from memory, then reassembled by someone who had never truly met her. She called out. No one answered. Downstairs again, she found herself outside. The air was heavy. The fog had returned, but this time it clung to her skin like something breathing. The church bells rang, 12 times. Then, once more. She entered the chapel. Inside, rows of pews were filled, but no one moved. Their faces were covered, as if waiting for a cue. At the pulpit, an old typewriter. She approached, typed onto the ribbon. Finish the story. She turned back. The pews were empty, but on every seat a copy of her manuscript. She picked one up, flipped through it. Every ending was different. Every version had been rewritten. Everyone with the same last line. She never left. She stepped back. The chapel doors were gone. The windows blacked out. Behind her, the typewriter started again. Click, clack. She thinks this is the end. It isn't. Another page emerged. It began long before she arrived. And beneath it, she wrote herself, here. And now the story is writing her. Chapter 11, The Escape, Right to Live. Some stories are not meant to be read. Some are not even meant to be written. But when a story writes back, the question shifts. Who is the author, and who is the subject? Miss Marple now understood that the boundaries were gone. The typewriter did not await her words, it guided them. The pages were no longer blank, they were anticipatory. The ink arrived before the idea. She stood in the chapel, surrounded by manuscripts. Each one hers, each one wrong. The typewriter at the pulpit sat still, but the ribbon trembled slightly, as if waiting to be fed one more line. And then the whisper returned. Not from the room, from beneath it. It didn't ask a question. It issued a reminder. Finish it. She moved to the pulpit and sat. The paper in the carriage bore only one sentence. Begin where you end. She reached for the keys. They pressed themselves. She looked at the final page and realized it was missing. Miss Marple froze. The page was indeed gone. The entire manuscript complete but for the last leaf. She stood, searching the pews, the corners, the seats. Nothing. Then, a creak. A door that wasn't there before opened in the rear of the chapel. Eleanor stood in the frame, smiling, eyeless, and in her hands, folded neatly, the final page. Miss Marple did not move. She watched as Eleanor stepped into the aisle. Each footfall made no sound. The light above dimmed with every step she took. Eleanor stopped 2 paces from the pulpit. The paper in her hand was creased at the corners, but otherwise clean. The ink shimmered, wet and fresh. She extended it forward. Slowly, gently. Miss Marple reached out, but did not take it. Eleanor spoke without lips. "You have to read it aloud." Miss Marple's hand trembled as she took the page. She unfolded it. There was only one sentence. The moment she read the words aloud, the story would close. She glanced up. Eleanor was gone. The chapel was empty. The light flickered. And then the typewriter typed. But she was no longer the reader. Chapter 12. The Aftermath. The story ends without her. Some stories end in silence. Not with a scream, not with a revelation, but with the absence of what should remain. On the final morning, Black Hollow was gone. Not destroyed, removed. The village no longer appeared on any map. Not digital, not printed, not remembered. Roads that once bent toward it now ended in hedgerows or turned toward unfamiliar hills. No postal records, no census data, no complaints of power outages or missing persons. Even the weather had forgotten it. And of the people who once lived there, none were found. No relatives mourned. No neighbours inquired. Only one thing remained. A box. Brown. Unmarked. Sent without return address. Delivered in 1980 to the Christie archives in Devon. Postmarked from a village with no history. Inside, one Remington typewriter. A stack of typed pages, and a handwritten note. The message was brief. She finished it. The pages were brittle, as though written long ago and only recently unearthed. They bore the name of a story that had never been published. The mystery Agatha never finished, Miss Marple's vanished case. The contents followed the structure of a typical Christie manuscript. Chapters, tension, build-up. But something was off, slightly out of sync. The characters too aware, the tone too still. There were discrepancies. Chapter titles that never quite resolved. Dates that did not match. Dialogue that referenced future events never seen on the page. Photographs were mentioned, none included. Archivists noted subtle irregularities in the grammar, as if the story had been edited by multiple hands, or none at all. And at the very end, on the final page, in faint black ribbon, 7 words. Miss Marple was never seen again. The typewriter no longer works. No one has ever claimed authorship. The story exists in one known copy. It has never been republished. Every attempt to digitize it has failed. Scanners malfunction. Photocopiers jam. Transcription software deletes itself. Only the original pages endure. And each year, on the day the box arrived, the archivist reports the same thing. The typewriter moves. Some years it shifts slightly, others it types a single letter. Once it produced a new line. She left the page, but not the story. Visitors to the archive report unease around the typewriter. Some claim to hear faint keystrokes. Others insist that the keys are always slightly warm. One intern, cataloguing a nearby shelf, found her name typed faintly in the margins of page 47. She had never read the manuscript. Until then, she does not work there anymore. No one has been able to trace the origin of the typewriter. Its serial number does not appear in manufacturer records. Its make is consistent with models produced in the 1930s, though the ribbon appears unused. The words it types match no known fingerprint. And yet, the story continues. Each time the manuscript is reopened, Each time the box is handled, each time the words are read aloud, something writes back. Then silence. Then a breath. Chapter 13. The Darkest Twist. Now it's your turn. Some stories end. Others wait. They sit quietly, tucked between pages, between keystrokes, between thoughts. Not dead, dormant. There is no punctuation that can contain them, no bookshelf that can hold them, because they were never meant to be read, only found. The mystery Agatha never finished became more than a manuscript. It became a place, a pattern, a possibility, and now something new has emerged. In this very recording, somewhere hidden, lies a coded message. Its origin is unknown. Its contents? A page. A page not archived, not listed, not acknowledged. But it exists. Viewers who decode it may uncover what the archivists feared to publish. A line that was never meant to be typed. A paragraph that writes itself every time it's read. Some believe it's a trick, an arg, a piece of fiction dressed in dust and whispers. Others are not so certain. Stories don't die, they wait. And now, one waits for you. You've followed it to the end. But what if the end isn't yours? What if Miss Marple was just the beginning? The typewriter is silent now, but only because it is listening. And now it listens to you. Do you think Agatha started something even she couldn't finish? Would you read the lost page? Or would you burn it? Comment below. What do you think happened to Miss Marple? And don't forget, some stories should stay unfinished.